let's hop into this webinar. And Oscar, if you want to give a brief introduction of yourself, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Oscar Villanueva. I have been doing security consulting for clients going on 7 or 8 years now. And that was after a 22-year career as a federal law enforcement agent. So I've been in security for a very long time, and I have worked on all kinds of different projects, and I'm very happy to be doing this webinar today, and hopefully answering some of your questions about difficult employees.
Great. So let's start it off with number one. What sorts of employee interactions have a likelihood of belligerent or violent behavior?
Well, I think in a workplace you always have the potential to have some of these difficult interactions with employees, especially management on employees, sometimes employee on employee. And some of the things that could happen or can trigger some of these difficult moments for employees is settling disagreements, for example, or maybe perhaps you do a performance review if you're a manager, or someone was expecting to get promoted and they didn't get promoted. Oftentimes that can create a difficult moment. Disciplinary action is always a difficult time between a manager and an employee when you have that meeting to talk about the discipline you're going to issue. Obviously, terminations are a big part of this potential issue with employees at work. Reductions in force, interestingly enough, can be a trigger for some issues. And of course, oftentimes you have domestic violence issues that spill over into the workplace, and that can also generate some employee interactions that can be somewhat difficult. So that's just a short list. There's many others that I'm sure our listeners can come up with.
Yeah, and I think we've seen quite a few of those kind of over the last year too, and some other ones that pop up and were a little more relevant this year than they have been in the past. And I know that you'll probably touch on those as we go on here. So
Sure.
Moving on to the next question. We have an employee that is very argumentative and difficult to deal with. He seems to always be angry. How do we deal with him?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, almost everywhere I've ever worked, we have someone that fits that description. My best recommendation is not to ignore it and to do some investigating and to be well informed. There has to be some reason for this individual to be argumentative and angry. So I would do my best or recommend that you do your best to resolve it promptly. Oftentimes, there may be some issue behind the scenes that you're not aware of as a manager or as another employee. And you want to get to that because if you can resolve that root issue, then you can perhaps change the way this employee behaves. One of the ways that you can do this is by communicating effectively with this employee. And this is helpful almost in every situation when you communicate with someone else. You want to do it in private. You want to show empathy. In other words, place yourself in that person's shoes and try to imagine or figure out why is it that they behave the way they do. Seek to understand the root of the anger by doing some background investigation on it. And by background, I don't mean a formal background investigation, but I mean just seek to understand what is it that's going on in this employee's life that's causing the employee to be argumentative and difficult to deal with. Do your best to listen carefully to what the employee is sharing with you. Whether it's an angry outburst or anything else that employee shares, it's important to listen carefully because you can perhaps understand a little bit better why it's happening and how you can help resolve it. Keep an open mind and be neutral. Remember that this is not personal. You have to continue to be professional and try to find a way to discuss the situation openly with this employee to seek sort of understanding as to where things are. Show respect. People usually respond really well to receiving respect during a conversation or any kind of interaction. Be honest in your feedback if you're going to give feedback. If it's something that you feel a little bit unsafe, or you think that there may be some concerns afterwards, do your best to have a witness, have someone else in the room. With individuals like this, it's never good to have a one-on-one conversation alone. It's always good to have a witness. And then try to find a satisfactory solution, and make sure that there's some agreement between you and that individual that, this is behavior that needs to change. These are the things that we can do. And make sure that that individual agrees with you that there is an issue, and that he's going to or she's going to work towards resolving it. And then finally, after you have this conversation and you work to resolve this and you've done your homework on it, follow up and figure out if, ask whether what you discussed with the employee was effective, whether it's working, whether they feel better, whether there's anything else you can do to help. These are all tips that you can follow in many, many situations. And I think it could be effective to resolve the way an employee behaves when they're argumentative and difficult to deal with. I think you can really do some work to resolve that and make that employee a more agreeable individual when it comes to being at work.
Yeah, that was a loaded answer, but all great things. And we had a comment as well that agreed with you on kind of the keeping things not personal, making sure that it's not just the yous and I's, making sure it's kind of a third person type of thing. So excellent points. On to the next. What threats do terminations or separations and difficult notifications pose?
Well, I think those are difficult moments for a manager, for a company, when you have to do a termination or a separation. At the very least, there's a little bit of workplace disruption. As you all probably know, once something happens in a workplace, just about everybody knows, no matter how private you want to keep it. So there's always a little bit of disruption going on. It could reduce productivity because people are wondering what's happening, and they may just be nosy and spend time trying to figure out what's going on. The big one is that it could generate, when you have a termination or a separation, it could generate workplace violence if not handled properly. And depending on the individual that you're about to terminate or separate, they can become angry, they can become difficult to deal with. So you have to do a couple of things. One is to think ahead and have a plan in place that outlines every aspect of what you're going to do. You need to prepare and do your homework before you actually terminate or separate somebody. You have to prepare for that meeting that you're going to have with that employee by following a few simple steps that I think will come up later in the webinar, and we can discuss in more detail. And also, there's a handout that Shane mentioned that has an outline of what to do when you have, say, for example, a termination. And then, sometimes it's not possible to do it on your own. So you might need to seek a little bit of help. You always want to have somebody present as a witness when you have these conversations. And sometimes if you truly believe that there is some security issue that may come up, you want to have, excuse me, you want to have outside help, outside support that can help you mitigate any kind of risk that you might have in that particular situation. So be well informed, prepare well, have a plan, and then execute that plan carefully. And usually through that, you can mitigate most of the risks that could come from someone becoming angry when you want to terminate them or when you have a kind of a difficult notification like that.
Excellent. On to the next here. Do rifts also represent an issue with potential violence?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because rifts are a little bit different than terminating somebody. Usually a rift, you're eliminating positions as compared to, say, for example, a layoff where they will eventually can come back or you will hire him back. With a rift, you're eliminating positions. So this can be also a trigger for workplace violence. And especially when it happens during difficult economic conditions. Say, for example, during the present pandemic, many people are getting vaccines, but many others have not. And so many people have fear of going out and looking for another job. The job market can be very weak at the moment because many companies are not able to hire, or maybe their services have been curtailed a bit. So if you were to conduct a RIF, you might have someone who will not be able to get a job easily to move on from what you are providing at the moment to a new job, a new career. They may not be able to do that. So that can create a bit of anxiety and a bit of anger when it comes to losing their job. So you need to be prepared for this, very similar to doing a termination. You have to have a plan ahead of time. You have to understand what potential issues may come up. I would say during a RIF, the majority of employees will not be happy about it, but they will accept it and move on. But you could always have that those individuals, few as they may be, that could become angry and generate some issues. They could potentially be workplace violence. So you have to do something very similar to terminations or separations when it comes to a RIF. And also, I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more on other questions that have come in before the webinar.
Yeah, this next one, this one queued it up perfectly. So kind of a hypothetical here. We have a large RIF coming up. Do you have any recommendations to prepare for this?
Yes, of course. You have to put together a plan. I think that's the main thing. You have to sit down. You have to consider all the possible things that could happen. For example, you will have different parts of the reduction in force. One will be the notification. So you've decided to do a RIF. Now you have to issue a notification to employees, letting them know that you're going to have a RIF and that you will come up with a date at some point when the RIF will become effective. So when you do that notification, that could trigger some anxiety and some issues. But then you have the period between the notification and the actual effective date. During that time, there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of gossip, if you will. People will try to find out who's going to lose their job, who's going to stay. Then you're going to have the effective date of the reduction in force, and that's the day when you actually have employees that are going to be affected sit down with their managers, who's going to notify that employee that they're now no longer with the company, and then they're usually separated immediately. Right after that meeting, they're asked to leave the premises. So all of these times can bring their own specific issues when it comes to a reduction in force and potential workplace violence issue. So here are some areas that you can work on to help put a plan together. For example, you have to consider whether you need security on site. Larger companies may already have security guards, which may be sufficient. Other companies, especially mid-sized to small companies, may not have any security on site. But for a RIF, my recommendation would be that you consider having security on site, and not just security guards, but something we call protective agents who are specifically trained to handle this sort of situation. You want to have someone that manages the security aspect of the reduction in force effective date, on the date that you're notifying everybody in person and you're letting them go. You want to have somebody that can manage the security for that day. You also want to have someone internally or externally that can do the investigation of any threats that come up, because you are likely to face someone who's very angry that will say, well, you guys are going to let me go. This is what I'm going to do. And you want to be able to capture that, and you want to be able to investigate it effectively and as soon as you can. In some cases, when you have a very large reduction in force, like I've been involved in a couple of times, they've even had a paramedic on site in case anyone happens to not feel well. They have a paramedic that can come over and help. Maybe not necessarily in every case, but depending on the size of the reduction in force, you might want to consider that as well. Then the other part, and this is something that the security people can do, is have close coordination with first responders. So, usually when you have a large RIF, you want to let the local authorities, first responders, police, sheriff, know that you're going to have this happen. You're not going to necessarily ask for anything or any help. You're just going to notify them this is where the reduction in force is taking place. This is when it's going to be, and we don't anticipate any issues, but if we do, we're going to call you. And it's always a good idea to seek the watch commander. Every police department, every sheriff's department, you will have someone who is in charge of that period of time. Usually call them watch commanders, but they could have a different name. Whoever's in charge of that shift, you want to have a conversation with that individual and just let them know what's going on. Not necessarily because anything is going to happen, but just because you want to be sure that you're covering all your bases. And then the last part of that plan should be that you monitor afterwards how that RIF went and whether any of these employees are having a social media chatter, they're calling other employees at work that remain behind to complain about things, whether there's any threats or any risk at all from any of these people that were let go. Usually you're not going to have too many of those, but if you had even one that's credible, then you could have some significant issues that you have to work through. So those would be the basic components of a plan. But the main thing is to prepare, to be ready, to anticipate that you will have some issues, and to just make sure that you have a good plan in place to prevent and mitigate any kind of concerns.
Yeah, those are some awesome points. I definitely have not thought about a lot of those when it comes to something like that. And it sounds like being proactive and kind of having that plan in place is super smart. So we'll move on to the next one here. We have decided to terminate an employee who has been a bully and argumentative in the past. Should we do anything special for his termination meeting?
So this is a good opportunity to talk about the kind of plan you need to put together for a termination, which is, similar to what I just talked about when it comes to reductions in force and RIFs, but probably a little more detailed, especially when you have somebody that has exhibited violent behavior or maybe bullying behavior or any behavior that's belligerent in the past. So the first thing you want to consider is you want to create a plan for each specific termination, because each employee is going to be a little bit different. And there has to be some evaluation of the employee, and you have to determine at some point whether this employee is going to accept the termination and leave peacefully and with no issues, or whether they're going to become an issue. So a plan for each employee is really important. Whoever is going to be the manager that's going to deliver that meeting and is going to terminate that employee has to be mentally prepared to carry out that termination. And it has to be done, the termination has to be done in a thoughtful and respectful manner. It's important to think about the fact that once you decided to do a termination, it's going to happen. So there's no need to throw any salt on the wound or to say anything that's going to be controversial to that employee. You're going to let them go at the end of the meeting anyways. So that the simpler, most respectful and thoughtful way that you can do that is going to help to eliminate any potential issues with workplace violence in the future. So again, that manager that's going to do the termination should work to prepare a plan, be prepared mentally, have all documents that are going to be necessary prepared and ready. You don't want to be in the termination meeting and then have to go get a document that has to be signed. You want to have everything in front of you, and you want to be ready to have all of these documents signed or presented to the employee at that moment. You don't want to have to leave the room and come back with a document. So you need to be prepared. If you have a workplace violence policy or procedures that were dictated by human resources or your company policies or by law, if there's a specific thing that you have to do when you do a termination by law, it's important that you make sure that that's taken care of and is followed. Again, I want to emphasize the fact that letting someone go gently and easily is the absolute most likely probable way that you can prevent any issues going forward. Again, gently, respectfully, thoughtfully, they're being let go anyways. So make them feel like they were treated fairly on their way out. Oftentimes when you have someone that has some tendencies of violence, You want to have, again, you want to have security present. If you have an internal security team, usually they can arrange for this sort of thing. If you don't, it's important to bring somebody from the outside to help you, an expert that has done this before and that can provide that support to you during that moment. Usually you want to have somebody in the room with you as a witness. So oftentimes having a security professional in the room with you is helpful. And I'm not saying a police officer, I'm saying someone who is trained in this sort of thing and that can help you from a security perspective in case there's any issue that comes up. Usually it is also a good idea if you expect any issues to contact the local police. Usually the security professional that's helping you can do that for you, or you can do it yourself. You should not expect the police to come out and sit in the room or be available immediately, but just to notify them. Some places will send someone out to maybe park outside the business during the termination. Sometimes they might even have somebody come into the building and be at the ready. But oftentimes they're really busy, they're understaffed, so you should not expect that they will show up, but you should expect that they will welcome the opportunity to be notified and to know that this is happening and there's a potential issue. So notifying first responders is a good idea. And then from a more practical matter, there's a few things to follow. For example, you should do it in a private location. So it should never be in a manager's office, in the supervisor's office. That's never a good idea. It should be perhaps a meeting room or an office that's vacant. You don't want too many things in the office in terms of items that can be used as projectiles or some kind of weapon. Very plain room with all of the things that could be weapons removed. You want it to be private. A conference room is usually probably the best type of setting. But you also want to make sure that when you arrange the seats where you're going to seat as opposed to the employee is going to seat, that the manager that's going to do the termination has the ability to escape easily if necessary. So you don't want to have a barrier between that manager and the exit. You want to be able to get out of that room if necessary. So you have to think about these things ahead of time before you actually execute that termination. If a threat of violence is identified during the termination procedure, I really recommend that you consider having a threat assessment. At that moment, say, for example, a threat was made on the way out, you need to determine whether that threat is real, whether it's a credible threat or not credible threat, and what sort of steps you can take to mitigate any kind of violence that can come and be an issue at your business. So you really should consider conducting a threat assessment on that. And then, of course, as necessary, consider bringing in someone who's specifically trained to deal with workplace violence and security risks that come along with it, that are external resources, especially if you don't have any internal security resources that can help with this or coordinate this sort of thing.
Excellent. And you did touch on this one a little bit, but somebody asked when they were registering here, it would be helpful to our clients to know when to involve outside authorities like the police.
Yeah, this is a great question. So the time to contact the police is usually if there's a criminal act that has been committed, say, for example, a threat or an employee brandishes a weapon or there's bodily injury or similar type of circumstances or violence. It never hurts to make that phone call. One of the things to consider is that police departments across the country are usually understaffed. They've been undergoing some issues in the last year or so with all of the different things that have been going on. So you should contact them if you think that a crime has been committed. However, you should not expect that they're going to respond. Usually they will respond if there's any weapons that were observed. If there's any injuries, they might respond. But short of that, it is likely that they will tell you that they're not able to come out at that point and to call them back if anything more serious occurs. So you have to consider the fact that they may not respond if you have an issue, and it's best to consider having an outside security professional help you. This is a best practice in the industry. So to summarize, you should contact them if you believe a crime has been committed. Perhaps contact them if you think there's going to be some issue with a termination or a situation like this, but don't expect them to respond and unless there is some significant harm or injury or weapons have been displayed or anything like that. So I hope this is helpful. Always good to contact them, but again, don't expect that they're going to show up in every situation.
Awesome. What do we do if an employee threatens our HR personnel or manager?
Well, clearly that's a serious matter. The first thing that I would recommend is make sure that the site is protected. Say, for example, a threat was made to a manager, a supervisor. You want to make sure that that supervisor is safe. Even if you're not sure at the moment whether the threat is credible or not credible, you want to make sure that that individual is protected. You want to conduct a threat assessment, which is basically looking at the individual that made the threat and considering that threat from a security and behavioral health perspective, just to be as complete and thorough as you can be. And then work on a plan to mitigate and resolve the situation. And then after that, you want to monitor and evaluate. So it's a serious matter. It should be documented immediately. Oftentimes, if the threat was made and then the employee left, for example, you want that individual or any witnesses to sit down and write down what they saw. The more time passes, the less people remember. So you want to make sure you document it. And then you want to make sure that you investigate it and get some help and assistance to make sure that it's all taken care of and that the risk is mitigated. And if there is an actual threat that is credible, that there are steps that can be taken to reduce the risk and reduce the likelihood of anything happening.
All right. Sorry, I missed my unmute button there. I think this is a great question. I'm remotely supporting all Latin American sites. All my interventions have been remote for a while, even before the pandemic. What are your recommendations for us as HR professionals that cannot be physically in the same place as employees? And I've seen a few questions come in regarding, remote work as well. So I think this is an excellent question.
Yeah, this is an interesting question. This happens a lot with companies that are more and more international. They have an international presence. Used to be that the big companies had offices all over the world. Now even medium-sized or even small companies have a presence overseas. So this is an interesting situation. A couple of thoughts. The first one is that workplace violence is different in different countries. For example, here in the U.S., active shooters are a concern. Weapons are a concern. When you go to places like Europe, for example, there's less weapons available to people. However, the use of a knife in attacks, knifings, become then kind of a problem. So you have to sort of consider the location where you're having these issues. In this case, in Latin America, it's probably, I would give the same answer regardless of where it was. What you want to do if you're doing this remotely and you're not able to be there to handle these kinds of issues, you want to make sure that individuals at that location have workplace violence and security awareness training. You want to train them so that they can better help you locally to deal with this issue. So you can sort of lead the investigation, you can lead the matter from afar over the phone or through Zoom or through some other communication method, but you want to have somebody locally that also knows what you're doing and what you're talking about so that they're well prepared to help you and to mitigate any kinds of issues. So I would recommend training. So you can select a group in that location that usually work with you to deal with this type of thing. And there's 3 areas that you really should consider providing training on. One is workplace violence, what causes it, what it means, how it can be prevented, how it can be mitigated. Security awareness, because security happens probably more frequently than workplace violence, security issues. You also want to include training on hostility management and de-escalation techniques, so that if you have to deal with someone who's irate or who is angry, you have some tools, those individuals have some tools to deal with that issue there at the moment when it's happening. Because unfortunately, if you're in an office in the US and you need to deal with this, you live vicariously through those people. You need to get them ready to help you when you have these kinds of issues. So having management on site trained on these topics is really key, and it's a best practice that I would recommend strongly that you consider. So we have R3 Continuum, and we have done this kind of training both in English and Spanish in the past for clients, and it has helped resolve issues a lot easier. So rather than put it all on yourself because you're far away and you have a difficult time really seeing what's happening on the ground, train some of those individuals at the local level to be prepared to help you and manage some of these things on your behalf and through your leadership. That would be my recommendation.
All right, and I think this next one is excellent too. Considering that some countries may have more violence and security jeopardies, how can you deal with employees' threats where there is a suspicion that crime organizations or local gangsters are involved?
Yeah, so this is a significant problem. We know a number of companies. I'm personally aware of a number of companies that have gone through this and have helped a couple to deal with this specific issue. The last one was in Mexico, where there's lots and lots of industry that has opened up manufacturing plants there. And unfortunately, the organized crime has oftentimes attack those locations to steal or to intimidate or to coerce or to seek to get something out of those locations, and it happens quite frequently. And unfortunately, if an employee is threatened and then they're considering using a local resource to carry out the threat, that's a very difficult situation to resolve. Consider the fact that in many parts of the world, corruption is a real issue. So depending on where this is happening, you might want to have different approaches. For example, if this was happening in, let's say, Switzerland, you could probably rely on going to the police and they would resolve it. But if you're dealing with this in, I don't know, in El Salvador, Central America, that would be a different story altogether. So what I would recommend you do is first have armed security on site just to cover your bases and make sure that you're protected. And then it's important to consult with a security expert that has knowledge of the place. It can be done through someone here in the U.S. I have done this for others in the past that has resources at the local level. And then seek to understand what can be done at the local level to resolve this kind of issue. There's always ways to resolve problems, but sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to do. Also, in many countries, there are specific law enforcement units that specialize on organized crime, extortion, those kinds of things. And depending on where it is and who they are, this is a good place to go. If it's a U.S. company, you're talking about a U.S. company and you're operating in another country, sometimes the U.S. Embassy can be a good resource. But however this goes, it's important to get outside help to help resolve it, because this can be very, very serious, and oftentimes they do end up in some regrettable situation where someone is harmed. My email and contact information is on the last slide. I'd be happy to talk with you specifically if you ask this question, and maybe I can recommend a couple of things that you can consider if you are encountering this type of issue.
Excellent. And yeah, we will be providing that. And also there will be contact information on the post-webinar email that will be getting sent out in the next couple of days. Moving on, we have an employee who refuses to wear a mask. How should we handle this to gain his compliance?
Wow, this is a topic of a lot of conversation in the last year and a half or so because of COVID-19 last year or so. And really, as an employer, and again, the first thing I like to say here is that if you have any concerns about this that go beyond what we discuss here, I think it's really important to contact a labor and employment attorney who can give you specific guidance on how to handle these things with employees. But the reality is that you will encounter some employees and even some customers or clients that are not going to want to wear a mask. But for employees specifically, as a company, as an employer, my understanding is that you can dictate what that employee does at work. And wearing a mask is one of those things that you can say you need to wear a mask while you're working. So it's not so much whether they want to, it's whether they have to based on your policies and the things that you would like done at work, because you are the employer. The first recommendation I would say is you should, if you don't have a policy about wearing a mask, you should create a company policy that says that you have to wear a mask. Now, we're going into vaccines now. Many people are getting those. We hopefully one of these days we'll get past this pandemic. This may be an issue that we don't discuss anymore in the future. But if you have concerns about this, the first order of business is to create a policy. It doesn't have to be very elaborate. It just needs to be a policy that says that employees will wear a mask during work. That way you can cite that policy when you talk to those employees. There's a few exceptions that I think you will encounter when trying to have an employee wear a mask. The first one is if wearing a mask becomes a hazard on the job. For example, if you have a manufacturing plant and wearing a mask becomes a problem when you're doing some procedure and it poses a threat to the safety of that employee, then it is likely that you will not be able to have them wear a mask at that location at that time. But they can wear it when they go to the break room, or they can wear it when they step away from that specific location. The other exception is if there is any kind of health condition that is worsened by wearing a mask. And some people have difficulty with oxygen intake, with breathing, and there may be a health reason why they cannot wear a mask. So in those types of cases, perhaps if they're saying that they have a health issue, you might seek to get some documentation from a doctor that confirms that that's in fact the case, if you don't just take their word for it. So you need to consider that. And also, there can be religious exceptions to wearing a mask. I haven't looked too far into this, but someone could say that it's against their religion to wear it, and then it would be difficult for you to actually make them wear a mask. So I would suggest that you investigate this with some care, try to figure out exactly what you can and cannot do. Consulting with a labor and employment attorney is a really good idea. A couple of solutions for you to consider. One is if an employee is not able to wear a mask and you're able to have them work remotely from home or another location where they're on their own, you could do that. Just work from home or work from another office that's just them in that office. That's not where anyone else is around. And the other one is to create within your area, within your office or your plant or your manufacturing plant, create a separate workplace where they can work. So you can accommodate them to not wear a mask and work in that specific location away from others who are wearing a mask. Just a couple of solutions, but what I would recommend is that you contact your employment and labor attorney and ask for more specific guidance on this.
Great advice on that one. Yeah, like you said, it's been coming up a lot more, especially as we're all getting more and more vaccinated. Next question, are there any warning signs to identify potentially violent employees?
Yes, there's a number of warning signs that you can count on to identify employees who have the potential to be violent. Now, any of these things that I'm going to mention on their own are not necessarily an indication that you are going to have violence, but it just means that that individual may have some propensity to violence. And some of these things, and I'll go down the list that I have here, past or present history of violent behavior. If they've done it in the past, it is possible that they will do it in the future. So you want to be aware whether they had any issues in the past. Frequent mention of known obsessions with weapons. I'm a gun owner, but I don't intend to harm anyone with it, and I don't intend to use it to intimidate or threaten anyone. So many people own guns, and that doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to engage in any kind of violence at work or anywhere else. So that in and of itself is not necessarily a determining factor. But when paired up with other issues or other circumstances or other warnings, then it could be something to look at. If there's any sudden change in behavior, so if you had someone that was very friendly and easygoing, all of a sudden they're angry, agitated, and confrontational, something is going on in their lives that is a cause for concern. If you notice that the employee has an issue with mental illness, that could be a trigger, that could be an issue that you need to talk about. Also, if there's any talk of suicide or harming themselves, this can be something, obviously something that needs to be looked at right away and provide some support, but that could also be a warning sign. If they are, if you have an employee who believes they're being persecuted at work, things are unfair, things never go right for him, they're being treated unfairly. Usually when you have someone who engages in workplace violence or becomes an active shooter, is usually what we like to call a grievance collector. These are individuals that go through life thinking that everyone is unfair against them, they're being mistreated, and that all comes to some conclusion at some point where they feel like they need to act out and do something. So if you hear employees who feel like they're being persecuted and they're being unfairly treated, you should pay attention to that individual. Also, don't dismiss your gut instinct. So oftentimes you see something, you feel like there's something going on, you should look into it, because your gut instinct is usually telling you something that's valuable to listen to, and look into it a little bit further. There's other simple things like threats. If someone is disgruntled all the time, disgruntled behavior, if there's any substance abuse, drug use, disrespect for authority, if you have someone who's always disrespecting a manager or a supervisor, you want to look into that, because there could be some issues there. Any domestic violence spillover, they have domestic violence, usually it happens to be the wife that comes to work or one of the partners, and then the other one wants to come to work and create a scene or commit some act of violence. You want to be aware whenever there's domestic violence issues, if they spill onto the workplace. If you see anyone that has anger management issues, or there's always challenges to management, you want to pay attention to them as well. That could be a warning. But again, you have to look at the totality of the circumstances. Any one of these on its own is not necessarily something that you need to be concerned in terms of violence. But when you put this together, if it's the reaction or the specific circumstance is strong enough, then you should be concerned and you should look further into it.
All right, excellent points. The next one here is no response an appropriate response when dealing with difficult customers or a toxic argument when no progress is being made. Does no response actually make the person angrier, or will it take all the power away from their words when you don't respond?
Well, this is another excellent question. I would say that it's probably not going to resolve the issue if you just ignore them and not talk to them. I would say that if anything, it'll make them angrier. So the best approach here is to actually find a way to resolve the issue and work very carefully to address their concerns. One of my colleagues, forensic psychologist, Dr. George Gregolias, who's our medical director, often says that resistance causes persistence. So the more you resist, the more persistent that other individual is going to become and want to win their argument. So the argument continues. You're not really resolving anything. So be aware of that. So it's best to talk to that individual and use de-escalation techniques, hostility management techniques that can be helpful. So here's a few tips that you can consider, and you can even practice some of these things on your own to be ready. The first one is to understand what is behind the issue. In other words, what is it that's causing this individual to be angry? And it could be something that's entirely irrelevant or something that's not really valid. It doesn't matter. What matters is that that's what's causing the issue. So you need to understand that before you can actually do something about it. People in general want to be heard, they want to be accepted, and they want to be treated fairly. So if you follow that, listen to them carefully, accept the fact that they have a concern. You don't have to agree with them, you're just accepting the fact that they have an issue. And then treat them fairly during your conversation. That's going to go a long way to making sure that you resolve this issue. Do your best to be professional. Remember that this is not a personal issue. That individual didn't wake up that morning and say, I hate, this individual and I'm going to go make their life difficult. It's not that. It's just a circumstance that you're in, and you happen to be the person that's in front of this client, this customer that's angry. So be professional and don't take it personally. Don't take it personally at all. Go with the flow. In other words, you can, if they tell you that, that you need to, say you're in a retail setting and they're saying you need to give me a refund for this, and you know that they're not entitled to a refund, just repeat, I understand you would like to have a refund. Tell me your reasons why, and try to reach some understanding of where they're coming from. That can be very helpful. Empathize and show caring. You can say something like, I really see that you would like to get a refund. I really would like to look into this and see if we can resolve it. And let's work together and see what we can do. You're not saying you're going to give them a refund, but you're also not turning them away and saying you're not going to do anything. Try to establish trust. Say and do things where they can see that, in fact, you are genuinely, honestly trying to resolve the issue. They will appreciate that. And then offer some alternatives. Oftentimes, when you have a customer or a client, you have the ability to offer some alternative so that you can resolve this issue. For example, when it comes to a mask wearing problem and you have a customer that doesn't want to wear a mask at your office, your manufacturing plant, your store, they come in, they don't want to wear one. You have a conversation with them along these lines. Be professional, don't take it personally, go with the flow, empathize and show caring. And your alternative that you can offer is perhaps you have a box of masks and you can just give them one and say, look, we love to have you shop here, but we need to have you wear a mask. How about if I give you one and you wear it just when you're shopping here? Oftentimes you can take care of issues like that by following these simple steps.
Great tips. Yeah, nice. Moving on, a former employee has contacted several people at our company after he was terminated, claiming poor treatment. How do we deal with this?
This is a frequent occurrence. Usually when you terminate somebody, they leave, they're angry, they're unhappy, and it's not unusual for them to continue to contact other employees, people that they met at work, friends, and just to vent and to ask what the company's doing. So there's a couple of things to consider with this. There's actually three things. The first one is when you terminate somebody or you let someone go, you need to tell them that you don't want them contacting anybody. And the best way to resolve that is the second tip, which is designate somebody as a contact point for that employee. Say, for example, you terminate somebody today and you say, look, please don't contact anyone. If you have any questions, you need to contact, Mary, the head of HR. And Mary will be able to resolve any issues for you. So if you have anything to discuss or you need any questions answered, contact that individual. That would be one way. You're channeling them to that individual. Oftentimes, if it's a difficult employee, it is really helpful to use an attorney as the point of contact. So if you have an internal attorney or an external attorney, if you say, look, you were just terminated, after today, your point of contact is going to be this individual. We appreciate you contact that person only. They will resolve any issues you have. And then to make sure that that sticks and it actually works, you ask anyone else that might get a call from this individual, you need to let them know that that person is no longer working at the company, and then any calls should not be acknowledged or responded to, and that they need to report it to management if this individual is calling. Usually, there's employees who are terminated who are perfectly, they accept the termination, they go away, and they want to stay in touch with friends. That's a different thing altogether. But this is particularly useful when you have an employee who could be belligerent or could be a problem.
All right, and we have just under 10 minutes left, so we'll keep moving with these questions here. And if we have any time at the end, we will get to some of the questions that have been asked by the audience. So the next one, a recently divorced husband and wife work at one of our plants. They recently got into an argument and were very disruptive. How can we deal with this couple?
This has happened many times in my personal experience, different places where I worked. The best thing to do is to discuss with both parties separately and in private. Ask them to behave the way you want them to behave at work. You have the right to do that as an employer. Establish guidelines and expectations. Separate them if you can. If they work in the same area, you might want to reassign one of them to go work somewhere else. And then consider using EAP to help them resolve any differences or issues that they have.
All right. A new employee has missed work a lot, and when confronted with his absenteeism, became angry and challenged his supervisor to a fist fight. Are there any tips you can offer to resolve this type of behavior?
Yeah, typically this type of behavior, if it's not resolved, can elicit additional similar issues. So you want to jump on this very quickly with any employee, but especially with a new employee. That's not a good way to start. The absenteeism and the threat to the manager or supervisor is totally unacceptable. So I would do a due diligence investigation. I would look into what happened, who said what to whom, and I would confirm that this actually occurred, just to make sure that, again, to do your due diligence. And then I would take some action. I don't know specifically what action you should take, whether you should terminate somebody, suspend them, or do other types of discipline. That goes with each specific situation. But you must, in my opinion, you must do something. You cannot allow this to just occur without any repercussions, or else you're seeking for this to occur in the future if you don't deal with it. So investigate and then do something about it.
All right. Is there any training we can provide to our managers for handling workplace violence?
Yes, I recommend that you consider doing workplace violence awareness training for managers. It shouldn't be done for all employees, but specifically for managers and supervisors. I've been engaged in this type of training many times over many years, and it includes a few things that are really interesting: understanding hostility and the violent mind, learning what the warning signs are, and what pre-incident indicators are for violence, what active shooter awareness and action plans are, and how to implement that at work, how to manage hostility, how to do de-escalation techniques, how to understand security, and what situational awareness is necessary for you to remain safe and keep a safe workplace. So yes, there is a significant amount of training that can be done. At the very least, managers and supervisors should have this training because they're the first line of defense against this sort of issue. We have done this training many times in the past. If you have any questions specific to training, you can contact me. But absolutely, there's a number of different types of trainings that you can do.
Excellent. What is recommended when dealing with domestic violence situations where the victim works in our office and is frequently harassed by her estranged husband?
Well, this is a common issue again, and usually this is not related to the employer. So this is that happen at home, domestic violence, and now it's spilling onto the workplace and it's becoming a problem for the company. So the first thing I would recommend you do is to do a threat assessment. Is this individual threatening this person at work? Am I going to have issues at work with this individual? And how can I help that employee overcome this issue? Consider providing security on site if you believe that the threat is credible and there's been sightings of this individual actually coming around. Consider alternative work settings. Maybe that employee can work somewhere else for a little while. This is a good time to contact local law enforcement and seek some support. And also consider a restraining order. Oftentimes, depending on the state, you can do a restraining order for the individual. Maybe that individual has already done one. And you can also do one for the company where you can keep that individual from coming to your location. Restraining orders are kind of unique in that they don't always work well, but the one reason to get a restraining order is that we live in a free country. So if you have an individual like this parked in front of your facility and you don't have a restraining order, that individual has a right to just stay there as long as they want. But if you have a restraining order that keeps that individual from being close to your facility for a certain amount of feet or yards, you can call the police, and because you have that restraining order, that individual can be arrested. So that's an incredibly valuable reason to get a restraining order. Again, you can get that one for the employee, and you can get one for the company that covers multiple employees. And make sure you address this issue in your employee handbook if you have one when people get hired. Make sure you include it in your workplace violence policy. If you don't have a workplace violence policy, make sure you create one. But this is an important issue, and it happens quite frequently, so I would recommend looking into it further.
Those are some great points. Next one, can you share some tips for preventing workplace violence?
Yes, so I'm going to go quickly on this so that we can get to all the questions, but you should really have a company policy on workplace violence and a workplace violence prevention and mitigation program. This is probably the two best things you can do. The policy and the workplace violence program outlines how you're going to prevent workplace violence, how you're going to handle it if it happens, how you're going to do follow-up once you have an incident that occurs. This includes safe termination procedures. It includes talking about the culture in your company and how threat assessment will be done. And there's a host of different parts of this that needs to be adopted for every company, regardless of what your size is. It doesn't have to be complex, but I really recommend that you have that. A policy against workplace violence and a workplace violence prevention and mitigation program. We have done this for many clients that didn't have one, sometimes very large companies that didn't have one, and it's just amazing the difference between before and after, because there's only two kinds of companies in the US and anywhere in the world, one that has had workplace violence issues and one that will have workplace violence issues in the future. So nobody gets off easy on this. And to be prepared and have a policy and a workplace violence prevention and mitigation program is just elementary, and it's really necessary to keep your workplace safe and secure.
And just backpacking off that a little bit, we do have some links in our resource tab that can provide you with some more information from R3 Continuous Protective Services as well. So the last one here, as we're about to hit the top of the hour, bullying is a problem at our distribution and fulfillment center, and it is not often reported. How can we prevent or stop bullying from occurring?
So very quickly, the first thing is to start early. When you onboard employees, you need to talk about what your expectations are for workplace violence, bullying, and security at your site. That's the very first thing to do. It's important to understand how to de-escalate and manage hostility so that a manager and supervisor can deal with these issues early on and resolve it before it gets worse. Resolve issues at the lowest possible level. Have a culture that focuses on saying something if they see something. So if they see something that's going on, somebody's being bullied, you want that individual to say something so that someone can do something about it. Implement a workplace violence program. Do really well done pre-employment background checks. Cultivate a culture of safety and well-being at your place. Build trust. And make sure that there are consequences for that bullying behavior. I know we're running out of time, Shane, so I'll just stop at that last point.
Well, today we had some awesome points. Unfortunately, we are out of time. So there is some contact information for Oscar up on the screen. Feel free to email him or give him a call or anything if you want to connect with him.